The number one thing I've learned from everybody from Aristotle to Oprah is that it doesn't matter what the issue is. It doesn't matter what the change is or the crisis is. All that matters is how we respond to it. So the crisis is out of our control. Nothing we can do. The way we respond is 100% in our control.
Jim, welcome back.
It is great to be back with you.
Yeah, looking forward to continuing the conversation. I think I had not even covered half of what I wanted to in our first discussion. And I do know that you're a pilot. I'm kind of curious. Have you been flying lately? You've been out there at all?
Yeah, I fly all the time. In fact, tomorrow I get to fly up to Wichita. I'm in Dallas today. I go up to Wichita tomorrow for my annual recurrent training. And what that means is that they lock me in a simulator for 3 days and try to kill me.
Okay.
Not literally. They just simulate.
They don't actually take you out in the plane, or they do a mixture of both?
No, it's fascinating. These simulators today are actually more expensive than the airplane. Imagine this thing that looks like it's out of Star Wars. It's 2 stories high on hydraulic stilts, and you enter it from the second floor, basically. And when you walk in, it looks like you're walking into your cockpit of your airplane. It's an exact replica. The electronics are all the same. So I have a Garmin G3000 flight deck that I can use. And the images on the screen are photorealistic images of wherever it is you're flying. So I could fly into Aspen, and they can change the weather. They can change everything. It looks just like flying into Aspen.
What does it feel like for you being in that simulator?
Well, it's very real. I mean, you don't think about being in a simulator. It is such an actual representation, because not only is it visual, but you're on hydraulic stilts. So when you're climbing, you feel the sensation of a climb. When you have an unusual attitude, if your airplane is, rocked to one side or the other, you feel it, and you have to recover. But it's a fabulous device, because in the safety of a simulated environment, you can do things like have dual engine failures. You can, have an engine fire, fly through a thunderstorm, an ice storm, wind shear, all of those things that as pilots we want to train for.
Yeah. Well, as a passenger, and I think for our listeners, it makes us feel even safer that you've got that technology to train for all these different circumstances. How fun.
It's true. But there's really an important lesson in this too that I talk about in the book. I talk about the difference between a caveman brain and an aviator brain. And the problem that so many of us encounter, whether it's in school, at the office, in the boardroom, and in society, is that we are humans, and so our brain tends to revert back to our instincts as a caveman to protect ourselves if we sense a threat, fear, right? So we have that fight or flight instinct. Well, imagine being a passenger in an airplane, and there's a problem up front. You have a sudden depressurization of the airplane, and now all of a sudden the pilots have to do something. Well, you don't want that fight or flight syndrome to kick in, because if they fight it, they're going to over control the airplane and rip the wings off. If they step back and they're afraid, they're going to, again, the airplane's going to spin out of control. So what we're taught, and I just happen to have this because I was prepping for my training, what we're taught in the cockpit is when there's an emergency, we immediately reach within arm's length to grab our emergency checklist. Now, what's in this emergency checklist is anything that could possibly happen to that aircraft. So if I have a dual engine flame out, I immediately turn to the section and I go through item by item by item the steps to handle that crisis. So while what this represents, I talk about in the book, is my aviator brain is trained to resist that fight or flight syndrome, to overcome fear with knowledge. And that's what this book represents. Access to knowledge.
I love that. Yeah, the book was fantastic. Read it about 6 months ago before our first conversation. For our listeners this time that didn't get a chance to listen to that first episode, you have risen to be, quite a leader on the global stage. What led to you wanting to be that going forward? I mean, what's the background that got you going down this path for our listeners?
I think it was just a realization that in my case, knowledge was the key to unlocking any opportunity. I dreamed of being a pilot as a kid. Well, I figured out that all I have to do is learn how to fly. But then once I learned how to fly, I realized all I had is a license to learn. I had to keep learning. So today I've been flying for over 40 years, but still once a year I go to a training course and I get what they call recurrent training so that I can learn new things and learn things and refresh my memory about things that I need to know to be able to fly. So this inspiration to learn how to learn is something that I think has given me a life that's just beyond anything I could have imagined growing up. And so I want to share that with others too. In the book, I really outline a roadmap that talks about what to learn, how to learn, and maybe even most importantly, why it's important to keep learning. And it served me quite well, and I want to share that gift with others.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what took you down the path of leadership? So I've heard you talk about, and we've discussed this before. You wanted to work as hard as you could wherever you went. Didn't matter. McDonald's, right? Starting out didn't matter, and learn everything you could. But it also took you down this path of you're good at being at leadership. Leading these large global teams.
I've wondered about that. I've been asked that a lot. How did I start down this path toward leadership? And interestingly, I think I can actually point to being a Boy Scout, believe it or not. And I didn't put two and two together. I didn't realize this, but one time about maybe 10 or 15 years ago, so not long ago, I was asked to speak to the National Council of Scout Leaders from all over the country. They happened to be meeting here in Dallas, Texas, and they asked me to come be a keynote speaker for this group. So I went, and in preparation for talking to this group of scout leaders from all over the country, I thought, what am I going to tell them? These aren't corporate guys. They don't really care about corporate leadership. And I went back to my scout handbook, my Boy Scout handbook, this little green thing that I had when I was a kid. And I was shocked to discover that all of the principles that were outlined in my Boy Scout handbook were basically fundamental skills of leadership that I still use today. And I mean, if you think about it, those of your audience who are former scouts, they'll remember trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, thrifty, clean, brave, reverent. I mean, these are things that were burned into my brain as a kid. And if you think about the ideal leader and you recount each of those things, they're fundamental leadership skills that if you want to follow someone, if you want to lead a group of people, they better be able to look at you and know that you embrace those attributes and you're going to take them in the right direction with those skills. Other things, be prepared. In my book, I talk about preparation being the antidote to fear, which is what stops people in their tracks. It's having confidence, and confidence comes through preparation. Do a good deed daily, do a good turn daily means, having compassion for those around us and understanding the power and importance of community that we're in. So all of those fundamentals, ironically, I learned in Boy Scouts as a little kid.
Yeah. So you and I, from what I understand about your childhood, were fairly similar. I never knew my natural father, lots of issues in the household, a few family members in and out of jail or prison. Like, oh my gosh, if I'm going to do this, I have to figure it out on my own and run. And I've always thought that gave me a huge advantage over most kids today. But what are your thoughts on that?
It does. I don't know if you've heard the Latin expression, per aspera ad astra.
I haven't. No.
I put it in the book, and I'm inspired because, as you know, I'm a space geek, and this represents my astronaut friends because many of them have come from challenging backgrounds as well. Perispera is Latin, or the perispera ad astra is Latin for from hardships to the stars. So that what it represents is the idea that adversity can be your superpower. And while at any given time we're in the middle of one of these horrible experiences and we don't like it and we think, woe is me, what it's really building is our inner strength to be able to withstand anything that comes our way. And ironically, I think you and I can both look at that and say, didn't realize it growing up as a kid, but it ended up being a superpower and maybe an advantage.
Yeah. Well, for me, I think it was a really big advantage. And then I've learned just to trust the struggle. I feel like for me to develop, and probably for everyone, we have to struggle on some level. It could be a little bit to something significant. So I've just learned to really trust it when it gets hard. It's like, oh my gosh, the way we lean into the struggle is what differentiates in such a big way. Is that
exactly? And it's interesting because in the course of writing the book, I didn't realize a lot of this stuff. I had to go back and research. Well, what does make people afraid, and what does make people fail in a time of crisis or whatever? And I time after time, going all the way back to the Greek philosophers, I learned so much about human struggle. And the number one thing I've learned, and from everybody from Aristotle to Oprah, is that it doesn't matter what the issue is. It doesn't matter what the change is or the crisis is. All that matters is how we respond to it. And that is 100% in our control. So the crisis is out of our control. Nothing we can do. The way we respond is 100% in our control.
Yeah, totally agree. I believe our early philosophers, the deep thinkers of the past, went much further with this because there weren't the distractions that we have today. And
Right.
just the fact that there's no way that human nature is fundamentally changed in all of recorded history, but the environment's changed a lot. But I love how they thought so deeply about it. So, I know you studied this, I'm sure more than I have. What's the difference, today versus then, and how we're thinking about these things?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think we are so distracted today by so many things, and we're so busy, and we have so many external stimuli coming at us from all different directions that we don't have the time that the ancient philosophers had to just sit around and think and just talk and understand the human experience. And of course, we all studied the old philosophers, Socrates and Aristotle, and back in the day when we were in school, we just sort of took it for granted. Oh, that's interesting things they have to say. But they were so profound in their understanding of the human experience. And I do think, as you said, we just get busy today and we don't take the time to stop and think and meditate and ponder. And they did. They had the privilege of time. And so they did really put in writing, in many cases, solutions to the fundamental issues of humankind that we so often forget. One of my favorites, in fact, is a guy named Enid Rushd, Rushd. And he was an Andalusian philosopher from a couple thousand years ago. And he talked about fear. And I've captured in the book this concept of fear being such an obstacle to personal growth, development, and even societal development. It causes tribalism. It causes all kinds of bad things. And he attributed it to ignorance. And he said basically ignorance leads to fear. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to violence and or hatred, and hatred leads to violence. And this is a negative cycle that you can reverse by replacing ignorance with knowledge, and knowledge leading to understanding, understanding leading to hope, hope leading to peace. And this simplicity of this, elegant simplicity of this thought was ironically captured by Yoda in Star Wars, because he was teaching Luke that that fear leads to the dark side. Now, how ironic is that he picked up on the teachings of this ancient philosopher from 2,000 years ago, said fear leads to the dark side, and he encouraged Luke to use knowledge, but something else, and the Force, which to me is a beautiful metaphor for faith. So if you have knowledge and you have faith, you have no need for fear, and you can reverse that negative cycle of fear and hatred and anger and replace it with understanding and hope and compassion.
Yeah, my filter along those lines when I look at making decisions, or are these fears justified, is it's sort of this value creation lens. Is what I'm doing creating value? Are the voices creating value? Yes or no? And that focuses me right back. And so that's my hack for not paying attention to the fear, and it works really well for me as a filter. And we talked about this a little bit before we got started today on this podcast. How do you know what the right information is, and how do you develop the right filters? Because we were talking about perspective versus perceptions, and everybody, not everyone, but a lot of folks looking for catnip for confirmation bias, and they just keep building on it, and then they lose their ability to think critically. So let's dig into that a little bit. That could probably take 3 hours to get all the way through.
Yeah, it's a good one, and I ponder that a lot myself. But and I've had a lot of people pose the question, well, Jim, what about instinct? Where does that come into play? And instinct is a factor. What does your gut say when you're in one of those situations? But here's the best. I found this recently because I've been really troubled with a lot of what's going on in the world, and many of the fights and many of the forms of, let's face it, war, aggression, have as a base a difference in religious beliefs, right? So there's a spirituality, ironically, that should be a suit of armor for one's confidence and, to keep this cycle positive, and it turns into fear as you try to protect your own spiritual beliefs, religious beliefs, whatever. So I struggled with that a lot. I thought, well, how can that be? And at the heart of it is this notion of fear, and that the most spiritual of people often put their instinct aside and their faith aside and give in to the fear that causes them to put their values on the shelf and say, well, I won't kill except I have to in this case, and if you dig deeply into that, the root of it is this belief that somebody's going to hurt you, take something from you, destroy your beliefs, destroy your people, your religion, et cetera, et cetera. So I found an interesting piece by one of our popes, Pope John Paul, who passed away probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And they've since made him a saint within the Catholic Church. And he had this beautiful way of expressing it. He said, if you have too much, there's this balance between faith and reason. Too much faith without any reason, you become a fundamentalist. Too much reason without faith, and you become a materialist, or, you're dogmatic about your beliefs, or you become very tribal, whatever. And he said, interestingly, that humanity has to find the right balance between these things. And that the right balance is like a bird with two wings. If you have this balance between faith and reason, you then can soar. Without it, you won't be able to fly, and you'll be trapped in your extremes, one way or the other. And after reading that, I wonder sometimes if this isn't this struggle that mankind is constantly dealing with, this balance between faith and reason, that causes even the most faithful of people to put their values aside and their reason aside sometimes.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it directionally, gets you thinking about it for sure. The reason faith is so important to me, it provides this moral foundation when applied in the way I believe correctly. And when I look at leadership, I want them to be capable of doing that thing, creating the value they were hired to create. But I also want them to be very moral in all the decisions that they make. And I do feel like we're at a place, kind of to your point, I think, where especially leaders of different governments around the world are becoming less capable and less moral, and that's what's causing these culture wars to happen out there. So that's
Right.
how I think about the two sides that you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. But any of these, the culture wars are a great example, because virtually any of these issues that create a culture war can be solved by rational humans coming together and saying, okay, let's find a reasonable solution to this. I mean, the most awful of those cultural issues, there's a midpoint at some point that that rational people could come up with. But instead, they take on a life of their own, and it almost becomes, we'd rather have the fight than the solution, in the name of whatever, our belief. And it's that balance that we haven't demonstrated. I think the leadership, because you hit the nail on the head, leadership is what it's all about. The average person doesn't have time to think about this stuff on a day in, day out basis, but that's what our leaders, that's what we're counting on them to do, to carry that torch of knowledge that says, all right, let's not kill each other over this issue. We're all people. We have to live together. Let's find a common solution.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast this morning at 4 a.m. when I start working out that you were on, and you were talking about how people will say, hey, this younger generation, oh my gosh, they're a mess and this is going to be a big problem. And you pointed out that, go back to Vietnam and how it was the same thing was said then, and it worked out amazing. So what it got me thinking about is, how do you know when this is just normal, healthy sort of, cultural things going on with different generations that always leads to more value being created? And between that and, wait a minute, this is going to be a problem. And I just finished Victor David Hanson's book. I read 1 or 2 books a week last week, The End of Everything. And he goes throughout millennia, and without exception, societies and cultures are either completely wiped out or significantly diffused 100% of the time. And my biggest takeaway from the book is, every time it happened, the citizenry said this could never happen here. And so I hear it here in the United States, for example, oh, it could never happen here. That's impossible. Well, then that would mean it would be the first time in recorded history it didn't. So you really got me thinking this morning about what is normal, healthy sort of discord going on, and what is leading towards something that's really horrific that we have to come back out of. What are your thoughts there? I know you've thought about this.
Yeah, I have. It's ironic. You just reminded me of a play that I was in when I was a kid in college, and it was Isaac Asimov, that, the science fiction writer that had created the first. He never wrote a play, but he actually did a kind of a screenplay or a stage play. We performed it in an auditorium, and it was called Nightfall. And the message of his play was that it was a depiction of a planet that had six suns. So it was always daylight. And then once every 500 years, the suns would all eclipse at the same time. And so no one knew darkness. And when darkness would occur, every 500 years, society would completely destroy itself. And it was this balance of reason and faith. So you've got the religious people saying, we have to pray to blah, 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 blah. And then you had the reason people saying, no, this is science. It's going to happen. And both sides agreed, okay, we'll be able to make it through this crisis. And then sure enough, the eclipse happens. We performed this in a planetarium. It was actually quite fun. And all of a sudden in a planetarium, it gets very dark. And as cast members, all of a sudden you could like smell a little smoke. And then we put like little flickers of flames, and people started screaming. And we would, as cast members, go up and grab somebody in the audience and terrify them, because what we basically depicted is society falling apart, imploding from within, because they didn't have this balance. The extremes on both sides, the religious extreme, the reasoning stream, both created the chaos and society imploded. You're right. And I, as a kid, I thought, oh, that's silly. That could never happen. And yet, if you look through history, Isaac Asimov was repeating the course of humanity that keeps doing this to itself. And I think that's why when I wrote this book, I wrote it for young people just to say, hey, you can do anything you want. It was very, lightly intended. A serious subject, but lightly intended. And then as I got into the book, and particularly now that I'm out speaking about it, I realized we need this. Society needs this, because we are obsessed with fear. And fear is that one thing that will cause us to implode from within. In fact, I'll give you a quote. Nikita Khrushchev. I keep learning. I'm learning a lot now, going back and doing some history, reading some history. Nikita Khrushchev in 1954, before we were born, said, Russia will never have to defeat the United States. The United States will defeat itself from within. And it's terrifying to think about that now, and then look at what we're doing. That brothers against brothers are tearing families apart because of their dogma about a specific issue that isn't, ironically, ideology based. This isn't left and right as much as it is pick a weird subset of issues, and we fight about it out of fear as opposed to solving it.
Yeah, I just did a short for my podcast on applying the value creation, holistic value creation model to voting and developing your own voting process. And if you step all the way back, I just don't think most of the citizenry has really thought through, what should government do? Like, what are they supposed to do? And I look at it and I say, well, they should be continually improving conditions to work, live, learn, and play at a lowering relative cost over time for the citizenry. That's how we know they're doing their job. So now I've got the high level, and if I break it down by, let's just say, federal agency clumps like healthcare or security, trade, whatever that is it getting better and doing those things over time? Yes or no? You could say, for example, the health and well-being of the citizenry has gotten significantly worse in the last few decades. And there's been more and more money poured into those agencies. So I look at it and say, well, they're not capable of accomplishing the goal. But I don't think most really think this way, going through, like, where's the framework at the top, and how we think about voting, not getting down into the weeds like you're talking about, and finding some tangent, root over here. That's what I'm going to vote on, yet give away the fruit because they did.
Exactly. No, it's so true. And I'll give you an issue that's near and dear to my heart right now. I'm out there banging the drum for education. I'm pointing out that, we taught the rest of the world the power of education. We taught China that college was really important, and they've gone from 40% graduation rates to pushing 60, and they're going to blow through 60 not long from now. in that same period of time since 2012, our college graduation rates have gone from high 50s to now pushing 40. And now in the context of that, right? So you've got both parties saying China's the enemy, they're dangerous, they're scary, blah, 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 fear, 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 got to worry about them. Meanwhile, they're just quietly educating all their people. And we then have both sides, both parties. The Democratic Party just recently said we're going to eliminate the need for a college degree in government jobs. It's like, wait, I'm not sure they're doing a great job now. we're gonna bring in less qualified or less educated people into these jobs. So I don't know. And then you've got the Republican Party saying, well, we're going to eliminate the Department of Education. And I'm going, wait, the one solution for our education system is to use technology, as China has done, to really advance the way we teach and learn. Let's bring VR, AR into the classroom. Let's bring artificial intelligence in and dramatically improve our ability to teach people with all kinds of different learning styles and methods, which we can do with AI. You can't do technology without scale. That's going to require a Department of Education. This will never happen at state and local government level. It's just, we can't afford the technology. So here's a classic case of an issue that is of critical national security importance for the future of America, an educated populace, which is going back to Jefferson. He said it was fundamental to the survival of democracy. And yet we're missing the point completely from both of our ideological extremes, saying, we'll just push it down and let somebody else worry about it. And that's to me simply a failure of leadership and vision. The ability, we get caught up in issues. In fact, what it is, we get caught up in perceptions rather than perspective. Because if we step back from this issue of education with a broader perspective and say, wow, we've used technology to transform everything. We're a leader in the world, and yet other countries are blowing right by us using technology and education. That perception could lead us, but instead we get bogged. I mean, that perspective could give us a different vision for education, yet we get bogged down in the perceptions of teachers' unions are killing us. We ought to have charter schools. Let's just put choice in. And these are all Band-Aids. They're all Band-Aids that we put, or blame that we're casting on a system rather than coming together as a people and coming up with a better solution.
Well, I think they do it to each other as well. They find one thing they don't like in education, therefore all education is bad. They find one thing they don't like in, Jim or Lee, and all Jim or Lees are bad, out there. It's like, wait a minute, nothing's as good or as bad as everybody says. And let's look for the value. When I went through your book, the kind of the order, and when you talk about the what, the how, the why, I believe the why is really what's missing. So I always start with why, that derives what, and then how. And the why is to create value in the world in some way. How do you want to create value? How do we help kids discover their value creation superpowers? Then that refines the what over time, and the how becomes super important because you want to go faster,
Exactly.
in terms of how you learn. But I think we're missing that piece of it. And I love how you emphasize the ability to think critically. Like, you and I are 100% aligned there. That means math, common sense, logic, facts, reason. You're looking at something, hopefully through the lens of, I want to create this value, and I'll get better and better at doing it. This may be a surprise to you. It may not. I've spoken to close to 4,000 high school seniors and juniors over the last 10 years about the virtues of entrepreneurship. And I've started 8 companies from scratch. I've had exits from a few million to into 9 figures. And I go through this whole thing. And part of the discussion is the environment from which we create value when we have a business is created by our elected officials. And we want tailwinds. We don't want headwinds to this. And I kind of go through my process for voting, coming up with something that will impact in a positive way my family and communities that are important to me. And I've never heard any student say our teachers tell us to vote Republican no matter what, but I've heard a lot of students say our teachers say vote Democrat no matter what. That's not teaching critical thinking. And I always say when they say that, congratulations, you have a process for voting. Most people don't, whatever your teacher says. And I would encourage you to come up with a process that's going to create better conditions for you and your family based on policies and our constitutional republic that we have and understanding how it works. So that's, I think there's a little bit of everything. There's some amazing stuff going on in education, and then there's stuff that isn't so amazing. How do we get it over to creating value? So I said a lot there. What's your response?
So I think you're absolutely right. I think there is noise in the system, a lot of noise in the system. And yet, first of all, I'm going to bring that fear back because there is a perception, and I'm going to call it a perception. It may be true. It may be that 90% of our teachers out there are liberals and they're teaching kids to vote Democrat. Honestly, I get involved in a lot of public school stuff and a lot of post-secondary stuff. And post-secondary schools are run by some of the most conservative people I know. I mean, these boards are really conservative. I sit on the board of Columbia Graduate School of Business. It's a very conservative group of people. And yet the perception is it's a bunch of liberals sitting around in a room saying, how do we indoctrinate these kids and make them all think this way? And it's just not happening. So what causes that perception that this is going on? It's fear. It's like, oh my gosh, they have access to our kids. They're going to teach them bad stuff. Well, hopefully what they're doing is teaching them to think. And there may be there's some out there going over the line and saying, hey, you should do this or vote that way or tell your parents this. I hope it's the exception rather than the rule. But even if it's the exception, I like to tell, and I'll equate this back to, let's take something that's a big fear issue right now in our society: socialism, communism. I mean, I feel like we've gone back to the 1920s when McCarthy was out there having these, witch hunts to find the communists. Who are they? Let's turn them in and blah, blah, blah. We're kind of back to that fear-based thing. And here's the way I look at it. I'm going to give you this for ideology, and I'm going to give it to you for faith, because I'm a capitalist. Nobody could ever doubt that I'm a capitalist. I've run 2 Fortune 500 companies, right? They don't come more capitalist than me. I don't fear socialism for a second. I did a lot of business in China. You know what? We're winning. We don't even know we're winning because we have convinced them that capitalism is the way to go. So when I started doing business with China, they were running around in mouse suits and bicycles. And now look at Beijing, look at Shanghai. If we're not careful, they're going to be ahead of us, but I don't fear that. I see them as a good competitor. They're going to make us more competitive. They're going to keep us on our game in worldwide competition. But I don't fear socialism or communism because they can't go back. They'll never get that genie back in the bottle the way it used to be. I don't believe, but that's my personal belief. Then I'll take you to faith. One of the things that I scratch my head all the time. I have so many deep, deep Christian friends who are terrified that Christianity is going to go away. And I keep telling them, dude, no one's going to steal Christmas. The Grinch isn't, that was a fairy tale. They're not going to take Christmas. And if someone is being sensitive to their Jewish friends and their Muslim friends by respecting them and not jamming Christmas down their throats, yeah, that's okay. There's nothing wrong. That's called being Christian, right? That you're being sensitive to the feelings of others. So what in the world are we afraid of? And yet we're ready to go to war with each other over some of these culture war issues that, man, they're threatening my faith. So my point is, that's what faith is all about. If you've got faith, that's supposed to be the thing. That's supposed to be the antidote to fear. So what are you worried about? Right?
Yeah, agreed. And then I go back to something I said earlier, as a comment from The End of Everything, that book that I referenced. 100% of the time, societies and cultures get wiped out or significantly diffused. And so for me, I try to simplify it and say, because you and I are pretty much 100% aligned here, and say you're either objectively creating value in the world, holistic value, emotional, spiritual, and material. They're all important, and the balance for each person is going to be a little bit to a lot different. Totally fine. But you want to feel good, or you're taking value out of the world in some way by rigging the game. And so if a big corporation, makes $10 billion in profit and everybody goes, oh, that's amazing. But if I look at the net effect on the planet and it took $1 trillion out, then that was not value creating. That was the opposite of it. So you're creating value measurably, or you're taking out by rigging the game in some way. And what I'm advocating for is how do we, and I think you and I are pushing for the same thing, how do we get more of the world to align with the value creation bucket? And then just simple math, it starts to squeeze out those trying to rig the game. And maybe all of us can do a better job shining a spotlight on it to say, no, it's not acceptable to do that.
Thank you, because you just hit back to the why, and the why that I captured, the probably the most important of the whys for knowledge is this element of character. Because if we can count on our corporate leaders to have integrity, and actually we've come a long way in the last 50 years toward building integrity. Sarbanes-Oxley was not a fun thing to have to manage, but it built integrity into that corporate system, transparency that required disclosure of a lot of things. When I was a CEO, I couldn't take a trip that someone would offer me without disclosing it and having a complete record of it. And yet some institutions haven't yet caught up with that, right? So that idea of integrity is not, it really is the answer, I think, for getting this right balance. And here's where I think corporations, if we have the right approach to, I'm not a big fan of regulations, but let's face it, we're humans and sometimes we need to be regulated. We don't let people go out and drive without a driver's license because it would be chaos out there. So we make sure they have training. We make sure they're meeting standards. And the same thing goes for corporations. But here's the bright light, I think, and I see more and more CEOs thinking this way, that social good and shareholder value are not mutually exclusive, that you can actually do good things for society and make money at it at the same time. That was the origin of the name for my book, Education is Freedom. When I was at 7-Eleven, I said, we're giving all this great money away to nice, well-intended charities, but can I make some money at doing good? And we found if we went into public schools and showed these kids a path from, don't drop out of school, at least get an associate's degree and ideally a 4 years degree. And here's a $50,000 a year store manager job. We'll show you the path. So we created this ability to do this. Now, when we put money into that, I was able to measure a return with a reduction in turnover, reduction in training costs, et cetera. That, I think, is a beautiful example of a company that's increasing shareholder value and increasing social good at the same time. And there are thousands of examples of that out there. What we've got to be afraid of, or not, yeah, I'm defeating my own rule, right? We can't be afraid. What we've got to defend against to prevent this implosion that we keep talking about is when a company does attempt to do something good for society, if we politicize it and then beat them up over it, and that's happened a lot when one side was complaining about cancel culture, and then in the middle of complaining about it, they started canceling, other people or other companies. Now everybody's doing cancel culture, right? It's like across the board. And that will defeat that's now got CEOs on their heels going, man, I better not do good for society because if I do anything outside of my lane, I'm going to get slapped around for it. That's where I think as society, we can all take a chill pill, step back and go, oh, okay, I understand why they did that. I may not agree with it, but let's not beat them up over it.
Well, leveraging fear to get what you want is a form of rigging the game, in my view. Not
It
cool.
is. It
And
is.
and so, as you're talking, I'm just saying, hey, there is productive fear. Like, okay, there's something here, I need to address it, but unproductive fear is not good. And then something you said, leaders creating the environment from which everybody creates value, and this is those kind of my words around it. So important. And what I don't think a lot of people understand in this country, in the US, is that we're not a pure democracy, and pure democracies fail literally 100% of the time throughout history.
Yeah.
You vote to, have elected officials, and they get to vote to do whatever they want without any rules of engagement. So what works here, we have the Constitution, which gives them, guide rails, if you will, that they can't go out of, are not supposed to go out of, that keeps, the bad side of human nature from getting out of control, because 100% of the time we're not going to have the most moral, leaders. But I think the same thing applies in all of our businesses. Like you and I we create the rules of engagement, the system, the environment from which everybody creates value. Much smaller scale. The biggest company that I've, started from scratch, we got to just over 500 team members, probably 64 leaders. Aerospace aftermarket, we were in 60 countries, went to half of them as we were building the business. I never once, Jim, had a leader quit, had to ask a few to leave or change, because we focused on creating value in all the buckets. On the spiritual side, it was connectedness, just lots of things connecting and deepening, strengthening relationships. But talk about, my God, we're going to have to come back again to get into 7-Eleven and some of this other stuff. But talk about the environment that we create from which everybody creates value, because in your tenure at 7-Eleven, you had an amazing run there in terms of creating huge value and increasing the value of the business over time. The environment had to play a large part. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, what I'm going to reference is the tone at the top, because I think leadership is so critically important, and the tone at the top is critically important because, let's face it, we tend to emulate and behave like those who are entrusted with leadership positions. So if you've got someone without integrity, someone that is building an organization based on lies, falsehoods, excuses, blame, all that kind of stuff, the whole organization is going to emulate that. And pretty soon everybody's blaming everybody and no one is moving. You create that inertia within. Instead, if you create an environment of trust and sort of mutual self-respect, let's say, where you're challenging each other to perform better, then the organization can thrive. And, the example I'll give you, and this creeps into every company, when you're a little kid and you're in class and you raise your hand, you're criticized for it. And that can create a culture of don't stand out. Don't try to outperform everybody else, because you'll get criticized. You'll get beat down for that. A leader has to be able to prevent that stuff from happening, because it creeps into corporations. It's the same behavior that goes on in a third grade class. Corporation, people will pressure each other for just being inside the pack and not stepping out, not working too hard, not being too innovative, not taking risks. So that tone at the top, I think, is really essential to encourage that collaborative behavior rather than self-destructive blame, accusation, internal politics sort of nonsense that creeps into virtually every company.
Yeah, and with that, how do you operationalize it? You had a lot of team members. It was pretty incredible at 7-Eleven when you think about it. How did you operationalize it to make that happen? I create the guardrails so leaders can't go out of bounds and do whatever they want to follow what creates the most value for the organization.
I wish I had the simple solution, just flip a switch and say, here it is. But I'll tell you what I used. I mean, I captured the principles in the book that I think I have found worked for me, and that's embracing change and creating a culture that embraces change, because that's where the fear creeps in. Something happens in the environment and people are at each other's throats. It's like, oh man, competition comes up with something. Oh, we want to kill them. Let's hate them. No, let's do better. Let's do better than them. They could do it. We could do it better. And it's that culture of embracing change as a positive, even if it's negative change. And then the only way that you can do that is to build an organization with confidence. And then, to be able to take that challenge on and not see it as an excuse or be a victim, woe is me. I've got this. I can do this. We're going to all succeed together. And then the third piece is clarity. And one of the things that I used, I think, very effectively throughout big organizations, because I call it big company disease. Big company disease is when you're so big and you have so many layers of management. There were 10 layers of management at one point at 7-Eleven. There were like 13 or 14 layers of management between the CEO and the store manager. That's 13 opportunities for miscommunication or confusion over what we're trying to accomplish, right?
Is that where you took over? You had 13 layers when you took over? Wow.
At one point, yeah. So we streamlined the organization, but I copied a technique that Sam Walton used. Sam Walton used to, when he got big and he realized he was losing control, he dragged everybody into Bentonville every Saturday. And every Saturday for the entire course of Sam Walton's career, he had people fly from all over the country into Bentonville, and they heard him directly say, here are the 3, 4, 5 things I really want you to focus on this week or this month. And then there's no confusion. He cut through all those layers of management, went straight to the source. So I copied that and didn't do it by flying. He had a whole air force of planes all over the country that would fly people in. Instead, I used technology, and I started it was the largest video conferencing network that was created in the country. We created it for 7-Eleven to have every district throughout the country be connected once a week. And I'd stand up in front of them. Here's the 3 priorities this week. If we do no more than these, we've got to get these done. Then I would go into any one of our thousands of stores anywhere in the country. I'd say, hey, what do you think is important this week? And they'd go 1, 2, 3. It's clarity of communication. So it's back to those 3 things. Embracing change. Man, we got to constantly innovate. We got to stay ahead of competition. Let's find things that are more convenient. Let's have the confidence to actually test them and put them in place. And then let's have the clarity of communication so that we're able to measure the success and accurately and honestly report it back, and then modify our behaviors. Or if I've got a new strategy, I better be able to articulate it clearly and succinctly, or nobody's going to follow it.
What did that do for productive engagement? Because I once a month I met with all 500 team members. Here's what the company's doing. This is what's most important. And then they got to report out the next half hour in each group what they're working on, how they're creating value, and the best work they're doing to create even more. The rumor mill couldn't go more than a month. I mean, it works so well. And I noticed a giant jump in productive engagement when I started that, and it happened for years. What did you notice there?
You're exactly right. And I don't care if it's a kid in a classroom, an employee in a corporation, or a member of society. It's all about engagement. They want to feel like they belong, right? And if you don't give them a reason to belong, if you're not engaging them in the classroom, they're not going to study, and they're going to be one of those bad kids that criticizes the other kids that raise their hand. If you don't engage them in the workforce, they're going to be out, working against you. They're going to create that corporate politics, and they're going to create that inertia that keeps the company from moving forward. And even in society, if we're not engaging our people, they're gonna in a positive, productive way, they're gonna form little tribes. And that's kind of where we are right now. We've become very tribal. It's us against them. It's like, wait a minute, no, we're all Americans. What are you talking about here?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for leaders that say they don't have the time to do this, I think the point we're making is they could be getting as little as half the productive energy engagement in their organization from not doing it. So there's almost nothing more important to get alignment this way. Does that resonate?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even worse, though, not only are they getting potentially half of the productive engagement, but that cancer within an organization will fester and cause the organization to implode eventually. It's just a matter of time. And again, it's ironic because, I mean, we can be talking about a company or we can be talking about society. It's the same thing. And it's that same dynamic of fear of something, I'm afraid of this, I'm afraid of that, competition, or afraid of the guy in the next cubicle. He's going to get a promotion that I don't get, so I'm going to take his legs out, that sort of thing. It's, it's just so counterproductive, but sadly, it's human nature. But again, the subtitle of my book, I struggled with this. Subtitle is more important sometimes than the title. But when I said the future's in your hands, I mean that so literally, because we can't control what goes on out there, but we can control what goes on in here. And if each of us takes the responsibility to manage our response to change and manage our reaction to negative things or, things that happen, the world can be a heck of a lot better place.
Well, for sure. As leaders, do we want to just sit back and keep complaining about human nature, or do something about the environment that causes human nature to create more value and lean in and work? And
exactly.
You've said it a number of times in interviews I've watched that you've done where, you'll just work as hard as you can, no matter what it is. And that's such an advantage today because so few people want to work hard. And just because leaders don't get the environment right, to me, that doesn't let employees off the hook. Like
right.
Both of them need to do it. And there's a giant double standard out there. If an employee that thinks it's okay to give 30 or 40% of what they agree to for what the employer is paying 100% for, if they hired somebody to paint their house and they painted half of it the wrong color and that started to peel off, they wouldn't be happy about it. So why is it okay to have this double standard? Like both sides need to come together. What I wish, Jim, is the whole world would just stop pointing at everybody else as the reason that their life isn't going the way they want it. Lean in and make it happen and work hard. That's my mantra.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And if we all did, we'd all get along a lot better, and the world really would be a much more productive and safer place, actually.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know if this is right, but in my gut's telling me, and just my observations, that we're not even creating 10 to 15% of the value we could as a country in the United States.
Not at all.
The pent up value creation potential in low and middle income families is off the charts. And so that's where I'm kind of focusing, I'm 63, so I jokingly say I'm almost a third of the way through my life. So the next 2/3 of my life, I'm really leaning into this.
Yeah. No, you're so right, because we're just not, and individually we're not achieving our potential either. So many people are frustrated with their lot in life, and they're not in the place they want to be. They're not making the money they want to make and all that kind of stuff. And it's so easy to blame, the government. We can blame the environment, let's blame China. That's easy to blame them. They're doing all this nasty stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, we are the best country on this planet. We created this amazing capability. Or at least our parents and our grandparents did. And, now we're sitting around going, oh, there's no opportunity. I hear people say the American dream is dead. No, it's not. Just go take advantage of it. That's why do you think there's so many people trying to fight to get into our country?
Right. 100%. Everybody can lean in and increase the value that they're creating in their lives, emotionally, spiritually, materially. And that's my mantra. Like, let's all lean in and do that, and everything gets better. And I think we just feel better when we're doing that.
Exactly. There's so much more reward and satisfaction in that, in reversing that fear cycle, getting our heads in the right place where we look at opportunity and strive for that opportunity. And it doesn't need to be, I mean, it's not like somebody needs to go out and be the next Jeff Bezos. I mean, but they can enjoy a lot more freedom. In fact, one of the things I point to is, the need to get off the money trail. And it's not really about the money, but so many of us think it is. If I only had made more money, it's really more about if I had more freedom to do the things I want to do. Now, sometimes money can correlate to that, but if you chase freedom instead of chasing the money, you chase money, and then you work yourself to death, and you wake up and say, why didn't I take that vacation or that trip I wanted to take a long time ago?
Yeah, I'm chasing how I feel and fulfillment.
Yeah.
And that, which is what you're saying. And I wish culturally we put a lot more value in emotional energy, positive emotional energy, and connectedness, which is the spiritual bucket. That's what really matters. I bet I could put $1 million stacked up on the corner of, next to my bed. I wouldn't wake up any happier. I wouldn't feel any better or different.
Probably worry about it.
Probably worry, like who's going to come in and, take the whatever. Jim, this has been fantastic. What from this conversation, was there one sort of big takeaway for you that stood out, or a couple?
Yeah, I think, I'm going to go back to this issue of perspective. And if we could all really we to get ourselves out of these perception issues that are making us unhappy, making us frustrated. We could first of all hold our leaders to a higher standard in terms of their integrity, their ability to have a vision, not just fight the fight and come up with sound bites that'll help them win an election, as opposed to truly outlining a vision for where we want to go as a society. That perspective, I think, will happen. And I'll leave you with, in many ways, what we're going through now is not dissimilar to where we were in the 1920s. We had a little bit of a boom, and then there was this threat of war and all this stuff. And FDR was the one who, in his inauguration speech, came up with the line, "All we have to fear is fear itself." And we are so much there right now, individually and collectively.
Yeah. Well, my takeaway, and I've formed this thought from this conversation, is don't vote angry. Vote from the right perspective, using critical thinking in a way that's going to create more value.
Exactly. Use knowledge, your critical thinking skills, your curiosity, ask the right questions, avoid tribalism, and let's hold our leaders to a higher standard. We're better than this.
Oh, I think so. And we all want to be. So I need to make up a few million T-shirts that say "Don't vote angry, vote value creation" or something.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jim, thank you so much for coming back for round 2. And I probably need a round 3 next year, because I'd love to dig more into the corporate work that you've done so we can learn from that. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really enjoyed it.
Let's do it again. And hopefully, I know you and I we have the same mission in our own small way. We truly believe that we live on this beautiful planet together, and we want to help humanity do well. And if we can contribute to that in our own small way, then hopefully we will have made progress.
100%. I'm right there with you. And let's recruit more, so we have an army out there doing this to make it a better world for us to age out in, and just for humanity going into the future.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you. All right. And this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today's episode, please like and subscribe. Until next time, show your value to the world.